Welcome, everybody, to our lunchtime talk today on aquatic invertebrates and dragonflies as part of Heritage Week 2025. My name is Maggie McColgan. I work with StreamScapes, and we're just delighted to have everyone here with us today. The webinar is funded by the Heritage Council, and we're just so grateful for their support. StreamScapes is an environmental education and community engagement NGO. We use local rivers and catchments as living classrooms to encourage people to explore and understand their waterways. We promote stewardship through hands-on learning and citizen science and engaging people in direct conservation practices. So we work with schools and community groups and policymakers to examine the health of their local catchment and the impact of human activity on the aquatic ecosystem. We have a hub here in Coomhola, the Stream School, but we also have a national remit. So we work with schools, community groups across Ireland, both north and south. And each of our projects is tailored to meet the needs of the local community. And it's really about making that personal connection and to community well-being and tie that in with the health of their local ecosystems. We really would encourage anybody who has any interest to contact us for more information. This is our contact details are there on the screen. Streamscapes.ie is our website. We have a lot of great resources online, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Julia Cooper, who is just an incredible citizen scientist herself and an fantastic, talented wildlife photographer, and we're very lucky to have her today to talk about dragonflies. So with that, Julia, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Maggie. I will just share my presentation here. And I'm really excited to be here today and talking about dragonflies especially. Of course, all the aquatic invertebrates mentioned in the kick sampling video are especially important in our rivers, but dragonflies just hold this special sort of imaginative quality that incites so much excitement. I find it really an interesting insect to learn about. I have more formal training in photography and other visual arts, so I don't actually have any formal training in science, but I feel that anybody can gain the knowledge if they go out into nature, they learn through experience. Talks like this replace what would have been general knowledge in the community many generations ago. So get yourself out there, start learning about little things, and it just is so addictive after a while to keep learning small bits at a time and work up this knowledge that's about these amazing creatures. So I started learning about dragonflies in a similar way about 6 years ago when I decided that I couldn't call myself a nature lover anymore if I didn't actually make more of an effort to be able to identify the nature around me to species. So I took my camera out and I started taking pictures of anything that I could find, and then researching in books and online to figure out what these species were. And dragonflies became a regular habit for me to try to identify because they're just such exciting, magical creatures. To give a bit of history about dragonflies, they've been around for 300 million years, so they predate the dinosaurs. And they've changed very little in their body structure since then from the fossil records, which is quite amazing. To give an idea of what a dragonfly might have looked like 300 million years ago, here's a combination photo of a modern dragonfly blown up to the size that they would have been 300 million years ago. So they had a wingspan of about 75 centimeters, which is about comparable to a sparrowhawk or a kestrel or a pheasant. So imagine some of these species zooming through the ancient swamps. They'd be amazing to see. But unfortunately today our maximum size is about 78 millimeters in wingspan. So there is a dragonfly hiding in the picture. For those who might be watching on phones, it might be a little bit unfair because it'll be harder to see. But don't worry about if you go out and you can't see dragonflies straight away. I started in the same position as well. I grew up in Canada where you have a lot more hot summers, a lot more sunny days. Dragonflies need the sunshine to warm up to be able to fly. And so if it's not above 17 degrees, you're probably not going to see them active, and it's very hard to find them. It's easiest to spot them when they start moving. So sometimes you'll go along a path close to a river, and you might scare one up without having realized that it was right in front of you all the time. So here is just a zoom in of this dragonfly that was hiding here in the rocks in front all the time. It blends in really nicely with its surroundings, and you can imagine, unless you start practicing, you won't be able to see these things. So I call it training your eyes, because I found that with practice, your eyes get used to spotting little inconsistencies in the views around you. Here's another view with some dragonflies hiding. So when you start doing it, your subconscious starts recognizing little inconsistencies that will draw your brain to actually being able to spot these things. And any little bits of movement can catch your eye. And you'll get better and better at actually spotting the dragonflies. So here is two, one here and one here in the picture there, sitting on the vegetation at the water's edge. So we'll start with a life cycle of the dragonfly. You start with the larva, which lives in the rivers and lakes and other water bodies. And it looks something like this here. They go into deeper water in the wintertime, where the water temperature is more stable. And in the springtime, they come closer into the shallows. They feed on a whole range of things. They're voracious predators in the water. They can attack even small fish when they are full size. Their jaw has a special hinge jaw in it that can allow them to attack these large things very quickly. And they're an important part of the ecosystem, but they need all the other insects and things in the water to be able to eat, to be able to survive, to grow into their adult form, which is the form that is far more exciting visually. So when the time is right, they go by a mix of daylight hours and water temperature. They'll come into the shallows of the water, find some vegetation, crawl up the vegetation in order to emerge from their larval skin into their adult form. Now, the metamorphosis would have been taking place a week or two before that, starting to change within. So when they crawl up the vegetation, they're ready with their adult form inside this last skin, and they break out through the top of the body and emerge from that. And that's why, if you look closely at the edge of any water bodies, sometimes you'll be lucky enough to spot these old skins, which are called exuvia. And that's an indication that the dragonfly larvae live in the water body, and there will be adult dragonflies nearby. And sometimes they get blown off of the vegetation, and you'll find them just around the banks of the rivers and lakes, on stones and anywhere else. Now, when the dragonflies first emerge, they are called penetrals, and that's just their immature form that hasn't hardened up properly, because if you can imagine the whole dragonfly squeezed into this old larval shell, the wings have to unfurl and stiffen up after they've emerged from their old skin. And it's a time that's really, really dangerous for them, because they've got really soft wings, they've got really soft body, they're really easy to be eaten by birds and other things, and they can't fly very well because until their wings harden up. So that could take a few hours for them to harden up fully, and a few weeks even, sometimes depending on the weather conditions, to be able to be fully mature. So you can see in this picture here, the wings don't have any darker tones that they'll form when they're more of a mature form, and the body hasn't gained its color yet. It's just this very, very sort of semi-transparent straw sort of color. Now, when they have fully matured, then they're ready to feed, to keep their energy up, and then, of course, to mate to complete the life cycle. So the blue dragonfly on the top here is the male, and he goes and finds the female, clasps her on the back of the neck there behind the head. On the bigger dragonflies, they actually clasp on the top of the head right behind the eyes, but the smaller ones have a little shield here that they can hang on to. And then it is the female's position to choose to reach up with her abdomen to be able to complete the mating. So For some species, this can take only a matter of a few seconds, but some of the species that we have in Ireland too can take up to 6 hours to complete mating. So again, it's a very risky position for them to be in, trying to hide in the vegetation for 6 hours to complete the mating cycle. And then when they have completed mating, then they're ready to deposit their eggs. So this is a female that is ovipositing. That means laying eggs in the water. She's sitting on a bit of pondweed here and curling her abdomen down into the water to be able to lay eggs in the water. Some species lay their eggs and insert them into the pondweed stems and other vegetation stems, which is why it's very important for dragonflies to have vegetation in the water, and especially close to the edges of the water. Some of the species like to hide in amongst vegetation while they're ovipositing to protect themselves. And amazingly, some will actually lay their eggs in sequence down the stem of the water plant that they choose, and will actually fully submerge themselves underwater while they're laying their eggs. Which is just amazing for a flying creature to imagine crawling around under the water. They can submerge themselves for a half an hour without having to come up for air, which I found just really amazing. I was lucky enough to witness one laying her eggs in the water the other day, and it's just so strange to see this winged insect crawling around underneath the water. It was a good 10 minutes that I watched her before she re-emerged. And the problem that they have as well is that they can be predated on by fish and things in the water while they're laying their eggs. And when they try to come back up to fly off again, especially the smaller dragonflies are in a really risky position because they have trouble breaking away from the surface tension of the water. Their wings are wet, they've cooled down from the temperature of the water being cooler than the air, so they don't move as quickly, and they just get stuck on the surface of the water, moving around, attracting attention from birds or fish that they're there and ready to make a good lunch. And sometimes they can't actually break free of the water unless the male comes back and clasps on and pulls them off of the surface tension of the water, which is just very, very amazing. Now, this is a little video of the other way that they do ovipositing. Some species are not like this one that sit on the pondweed and dip their abdomen into the water. Other species do it in a much faster way and just flick their abdomen into the water to sort of wash their eggs off of the end of the abdomen in multiple spots, and the eggs just are freely in the water. Now, I'm choosing the camera that I use is for the photo quality, not the video quality, so I'll play the video again, but I apologize for the poor quality of it. It's just to be able to show the movement, which is just really fun to see, the sort of flicking in the water of the abdomen to wash the egg off in spots over here and spots over there. And it's a very quick process compared to the other species that have to struggle crawling around underneath the water, breaking out of surface tension, which then amazingly is the smaller creatures tend to be the ones that submerge themselves, and the larger species, which would be seemingly stronger to get out of the water, actually do this much easier way of just flicking their tail or abdomen into the water. So where do you find dragonflies? Here's some of the dragonfly habitats. Rivers and streams, lakes and ponds, bogs and fens, anywhere where there's a bit of water, anything in between these categories like canals and drainage ditches. They just need the water because, of course, their larval stage is in the water. Some of the larvae complete their cycle in 2 years, some take as long as 5 years in the water, so they, all but one species in Ireland, need a really stable water source. There's one species that's adapted itself to temporary water sources, and they speed up their life cycle and can complete it in 1 year, but most of them take between 2 and 5 years in the water before they can complete into their adult form. And then even though their adult form is such a magical, interesting thing, they don't last into the next winter. So there's some speculation as to how long each adult actually survives for, because there's so many risk factors in their life as an adult that some will only live for a matter of a few days, a few weeks, and it's possible that some last for a few months, but not a high proportion of them. So all the pictures that I'm showing in my presentation here are all pictures that I've taken myself in West Cork. So it's definitely a West Cork focus because I like to speak more from my own experiences rather than things that I haven't seen myself. So I'll be focusing on all the species that can be seen in West Cork, and these are examples of habitats that are quite common, but will also be useful for anybody in other parts of the country too. So the first thing we need to do for analyzing learning about dragonflies is to know that there's a difference between dragonflies and damselflies. I've only used the term dragonfly so far because it's a sort of umbrella term that can mean both dragonflies and damselflies. But if you're going to start into identification closer to species level, you need to know the difference between which ones are true dragonflies and which ones are damselflies. So I've shown two pictures roughly to scale here compared to each other, the dragonfly on the left and the damselfly on the right. And the dragonflies, as you can see, are generally much bigger than the damselflies. So that's a very early start way to actually tell the difference between them. There is a few species that cross over, but generally the difference is more of this extreme where you can easily tell by size whether it's a dragonfly or a damselfly. Apart from that, you can go on to the wings. So dragonflies hold their wings apart when they're at rest and perpendicular to the body. So they make this sort of T shape or cross shape between their body and the wings. And they will never rest their wing in any other position besides this generally. Whereas the damselflies, as you can see in this picture, hold their wings nearly together, sometimes flattened together above their abdomen. So quite a different positioning for when they're at rest. There is one type family of damselflies that are called spread wings because they do spread their wings a little bit apart in more of a V shape, but they will never hold them perfectly perpendicular like the dragonflies do. A third difference is their eyes. So their eyes are enormous in the front of their head here. This is all eyes. Because they're such good hunters, they need these gigantic eyes to be able to judge different distances and movement around them to be able to catch things on the fly. And in dragonflies, their eyes are so big that they're touching each other. Their head is almost entirely made up of eyes. Whereas the damselflies here, their head is more like this long, elongated form with the eye on each end of it. So some people describe them as sort of dumbbell-shaped heads, with the eyes being at the end of the dumbbell head. The other difference between the dragonflies and the damselflies is in their behavior. The dragonflies have a confident, very forceful flight. They're like sort of army helicopters zooming around in straight positions back and forth and around patrolling areas. And they seem like they can just do just about anything in flight. They can eat in flight. Some of them can mate in flight. It's a very confident flight. Whereas the damselflies, I would describe more as a graceful or fragile flight. If there's any bit of wind out, you can see them sort of struggling to go against the wind, desperate to get to somewhere to latch onto, to hold onto so they don't get blown away. And even when it's not windy, their flight is much more graceful, sort of swooping up and down, gently gliding along, not in a very determined sort of flight like the dragonflies. So. Next, we'll go on to some anatomy. Just some very basic anatomy is important to be able to talk about the differences between different species of dragonflies and damselflies. So these ones are dragonfly anatomy. So the top we talked about already is where the head is, which is mostly made out of their gigantic eyes. The thorax is the name, meaning this next section of their body, which is where the wings are attached. And the rest of the long part of the body is called the abdomen. And at the very tip of the abdomen, they have their anal appendages, which are important for knowing the difference between the males and females and also some different species. Three distinguishing features on the left here are important for different species identifying. The antehumeral stripes are these stripes on the top of the thorax here before the wing connections start. In this one here in the picture, it's sort of broken up into 2 dots on each side. It's not a full line. Some of the species will be a full line, and some will be just broken up into dots or exclamation mark sort of shapes. The costa is the name for, if I zoom in a bit, this top line of the wing vein, and it is colored in some species differently than other species. This one's got a yellow tint to the costa along the top here. The rest of the veins are black in it, but the top line has a yellow tinge to it. And the last terminology here for the dragonflies is the pterostigma, which is this sort of window shape in the wing, between the wing veins, that is colored differently than the rest of the wing. Which is also important for some species. It's a longer, thinner shape. Some is more of a short, squat shape, and sometimes the color is important for the pterostigma to know which species it is as well. Now on to damselfly anatomy. So we still have the same basic head, thorax, and abdomen. As you remember, the head is much more elongated shape than the dragonflies. The thorax looks pretty similar. It has the wing connections and it has these anti-humeral stripes on it, which are complete in this picture. And the rest is the abdomen. Then we have a new one for the damselflies is the pronotum, which is this sort of shield-shaped bit between the head and the thorax. Sometimes it's called the prothorax as well. And it is a very important part for identifying some of the damselflies, even though it's very small, but that's where the male clasps onto during mating. And it's distinct for different species so that the species can't easily interbreed. And again, we have the pterostigma, which is important just for one species of damselfly, this little colored or tinted sort of window in the veins towards the edge of the wing there. Now I've made a little bit of a chart here, which is helpful for identifying the different damselflies and dragonflies. And it is broken up into the side on the left here for the damselflies and the side here for the dragonflies. You can go along the top of the chart, and these are sort of questions you can ask: whether it has red in it, or does it have a baby blue color in it, or is it metallic but not red? And you answer these questions and go down the line to be able to identify what species you have to determine belongs to that group. Now the top line that I've used with photos and colored with green lettering is because they're the easy ones. So if you're a beginner, start with some of these easy species. 5 species here that I think are quite a good starting point to identify without getting any complications of some of the more difficult species. So, for example, the large red damselfly. If you see a damselfly, you know it's a damselfly, not a dragonfly, and it has any amount of red in it, it's going to be your large red damselfly. So a very good beginner one to learn, very common to see as well. Whereas if you have ones that have baby blue color in them, you're going down this arrow here to the orange section here, which are the difficult species. You have to tell the difference between 4 different species that look quite similar. So that's one not to get caught up in if you're just a beginner, because you don't want to throw yourself off feeling too overwhelmed by the little details to take in. At the bottom of the chart, I have in red some of the less common species, which when I first started I got confused by because it just seemed overwhelming that there's so many different things to consider. But now I know that some of the less common species, if you're a beginner, you can pretty much ignore them to get your confidence up in the identifying of the different species, because these are species here in red that don't occur in very many spaces. The Irish bluet is only restricted to the northern half of the country. It's not seen south of Limerick. So down here in West Cork, we don't have to consider it at all. And some of the other scarce emerald and scarce bluetail are just so uncommon that unless you know that there's some in your area, you don't really have to worry about considering it in your identification. If we get into the dragonflies, we have 3 very easy dragonflies to identify, but you get into some of the other ones that you have to tell the difference between small amounts of things between different species or more in the difficult level at the bottom. So we will leave that chart and revisit it in a minute, but we'll get on to the different species. So if you're a beginner, just try to concentrate on the males of the species, because the females and the immature forms get more complicated, and you should just restrict yourself to trying to get a hand on the males before you worry about the other ones. This one, if we remember from our chart, is a damselfly because it has a longer head. It has wings that are not held in a T position, and you can't tell from the picture, but it's much smaller form than the big dragonflies. It has red in it, so that means that it's a large red damselfly. This one happens to be a male, which, even though it's a little bit blurry at the end, you can see there's these two little claspers at the bottom of the abdomen, which is where it holds on to the female with those claspers, and that can help you know that it's a male. At the bottom of the page, I've given the Latin names for anyone who's interested, as well as the Irish name for anyone who's interested. I won't be calling those out because my pronunciation will probably not be great for them. And the location that I found it in, just to remind everyone that these are not species you have to go very far to look for. These are all ones in West Cork locally, and I've put a name in brackets if you're not familiar with the smaller townlands. I've given a larger postal location nearby to link that to. This is the large red damselfly female. So a little bit different coloring than the male. The male is much a stronger red color. The female has much more yellow in it and more orange. But again, it has red in it, so that gives us the knowledge that it has to be the large red damselfly, as long as we know it's a damselfly. Wings are held together by its abdomen, not in a T shape, and it's much smaller. So one way that we can know that it is female is if we see it from the side, the abdomen at the very tip of the abdomen is much more club-shaped. It's a bit wider, and that's because the female has the ovipositor in here that makes that part of her abdomen a bit more swollen. Now this one gets a bit more tricky, because you would think, comparing to the last one, that the coloring matches the female coloring form rather than the male form that we saw a minute ago. But it's actually an immature male. It just hasn't darkened up to its full red coloring yet. When they are younger, a lot of the males actually tend to imitate the female colorings. Some scientists claim that that might be an evolutionary thing to be able to not get them involved in any territorial disputes before they're fully mature. So they blend in more with the females. They tend to stay a bit farther away from the water bodies, so you're more likely to find them within woodlands or meadows close by to a river or a lake, waiting to mature and hunting and getting their energy up before they go into the mating schemes. Now, if you can get a picture or a view with binoculars from the side, you can tell the difference between the males and females quite easily, because the males have this spot here under its abdomen, which is called the secondary genitalia, which is where the female brings her abdomen up to complete mating. So if I go back to the female picture here, you can see on her abdomen that there is no such secondary genitalia underneath the abdomen. If I zoom in, it's just perfectly flat under there. So that's a good giveaway, if you can get the side shot, that this one is a male and not the female, despite the coloring. Now, if we put all the three pictures together, you might get a better sense of the coloring differences too, because you can see the male, the pattern in the immature male is matching the pattern of the male. It has these sort of stripes at the very bottom of the abdomen, and the rest of the abdomen is red with just these little thin stripes. So even though the thorax hasn't colored up red yet, you can see how the rest is eventually going to become the same color form as the male just by darkening its red up, whereas the female has much more of the darker bits in between her abdomen farther up, and will never have the full red that the male has. Now, to revisit back to the chart for a minute, we've covered the red damselflies now as the large red damselfly. We'll skip the baby blues for a minute because they're more difficult section, and we'll go on to, well, what if it has quite a metallic coloring on it, but doesn't have the red, because the red has to be the red damselfly. So if it has a metallic sort of coloring of the abdomen and thorax, you need to look up whether it has dark toned wings or clear wings. If it's the dark toned wings, you're getting into two species, the beautiful demoiselle and the banded demoiselle. And this is the beautiful demoiselle, the male. I think it's just an absolutely gorgeous creature. The first time that I saw one, I was in a little rowboat and I nearly tipped the boat over. I was so excited to try to get a photograph of it. But just absolutely gorgeous. And these dark wings are very distinguishing for it. I don't have a picture of the banded demoiselle because I haven't been lucky enough to see one yet. And they don't seem to be quite as common in West Cork as the beautiful demoiselle. But the banded demoiselle looks very similar to this one, except for instead of the entire wings being dark, it has what they call a big thumbprint of dark, so that the tip of the wing is still clear and the wing closest to where they're attached to the thorax is clear, but all the middle section is dark, like this one. So once you know, it's very easy to determine the difference between the two. The female is a bit different coloring, lighter wings, more of a brownish tint to the wings, and the rest of the body is this metallic green sort of color instead. I haven't been lucky enough to get a very good close shot of them yet. They always seem to be on the opposite side of the river to where I am, and having no intention to come closer. They tend to hide away in the vegetation a little bit more than the males, because the males want to advertise themselves a bit more. So here's them both together to compare. You can still see that they both have dark wings, and they both have a sort of metallic sheen to them. So they're the beautiful demoiselles. Now, the next one on our chart had metallic coloring, but clear wings. And this is the emerald damselfly, another favorite of mine because it just has such gorgeous colorings. This sort of metallic-y green tinged here with a little bit of blue in it is just really, really gorgeous. And this is the male. You can see underneath the section of the abdomen here, it has the secondary genitalia, so that's the giveaway that it's male. And it's holding its wings together above the abdomen, so that means it's the damselfly. The sort of dumbbell-shaped head with the eyes on each end is easier to see on this one. So emerald damselfly. Now the emerald damselflies change their color a little bit as they get older. So this picture, this one would be a mature individual. But this one's just been around a little bit longer, and they develop a bit more of this bronzy sort of sheen on the green. So it's not quite as bright green, it's more of this yellowish bronze color. But still the emerald damselfly, because it's still a sort of metallic tone to it with clear wings. And this one we can see how we might get confused between the damselflies and the dragonflies, because the other name for the emerald damselfly is that it's part of the spreadwing family, because they're known to spread their wings a bit more than the regular damselflies. But you can see it's not in a perfectly perpendicular position, so it's not a dragonfly, it's still a damselfly. This is the female of the emerald damselfly, another gorgeous one, especially when they're very fresh and bright and they catch the sunlight and sparkle like mad. This one has caught a cranefly for lunch. And unlike the bigger dragonflies can eat on the wing in the middle of flying through the air on its way to its next lunch. But the emerald damselflies, like a lot of the smaller damselflies, have to land to eat. So it's a good opportunity to watch them because they're so preoccupied with their meal that they don't mind if you sneak up very slowly. As long as you mind where your shadow is, that you're not going to startle them with your shadow suddenly going across them. And then you can get a good view of them having their lunch. This one's sitting on the gorse plant here. And we can see from the side shot, it doesn't have the secondary genitalia of the male, and it has the club tip with the ovipositor in it, so we know that that one is the female. Now, like the males for the emerald damselflies, the females, as they get older, lose their bright green color, and it turns into this more of this bronze tone that you can see on the tip of the abdomen here. So not quite as catching in the light, but still a metallic sheen nonetheless. Here is a comparison for all 4 in a row, so you can see the coloring differences between the males and the females, and that the older individuals still match the same patterns, but just develop a bit more of this sort of bronzy tone on them. These 2 in the middle just happen to be both ones that are spreading their wings, and the other ones showing the other position for damselfly wings. So back to the chart so that we can keep ourselves knowing where we're going. We've covered red damselflies, we've covered the metallic damselflies, the dark wings is the demoiselle choices, clear wings is the emerald damselfly. If you're in an area where there is this known to be the scarce emerald, you can try to consider them. They are very similar, and you have to look at the positioning of the anal appendages and the curve of them to be able to tell the difference. So you need a really good photograph or a really good view of them. But again, not one that's seen around West Cork, so one that we don't really have to consider here. So the only category that we haven't considered yet for damselflies is ones that have mostly a baby blue and black coloring on them. And they are going to get into the difficult category because there's 4 that we have to consider that are very similar to each other, and 2 rarer ones that we don't have to worry about as much. If we're just in the beginner scheme of things, you can worry about them when you get much more experienced and confident. So the first one we'll talk about is the common blue damselfly. This is a male here. And what you need to do for the blues is to practice your bushcraft skills of sneaking up very carefully on them so that you can get a very good view of them. Because what you need to do is see this first segment here of the abdomen past where the wings are connected. Because it is the shape of this black blob here that is important to distinguish between the species of the blue damselflies. So this common blue has this sort of circular shape, or some people describe it as a sort of mushroom shape, connected to the line here between the next abdomen segment. So if you see this sort of circular mushroom shape here, it is a common blue damselfly, if you're lucky enough to get a good enough view that you can see that. They're a pretty common species, and this is what the immature male would look like. So it hasn't developed its blue coloring yet, but you can see from the side that it has the secondary genitalia here, which shows us that it's the male. And if you zoom in here, you can just barely see that this is the sort of circular shape here connected to the line, which makes it the common blue. It will develop its blue color over the next few days or week, depending on the temperature and sunlight hours. And you can see in the tail here that it's just starting to get a bit of a blue tinge, whereas the thorax hasn't developed. It's still the pinkish sort of color of the immatures. Another thing for the common blue damselflies compared to the other damselflies is the side of the thorax here. So you can see the antihumeral stripe here, separated between the black on the top and the black stripe here. And then this area is mostly clear except for this little black mark here. But the other blue damselflies will also have another black mark in here that the identification books would call a spur. So a little half black segment here sticking out. And the common blue damselfly is the only one that doesn't have this spur. So if you can see that plain section and not get confused by this little black spot there, then you can know it's a common blue as well. Now, the females of all the blue damselflies are very tricky to identify, so it is recommended to only identify the females if they are in tandem with a male, because the male can give away the identification to species level much more easily than the female can. The females tend to be darker. Here's the female here, and the male's clasped onto the pronotum behind her head. But we can see from the male that it has this circular sort of mushroom shape connected to the line. It doesn't have the black spur in this space here, and that means that it is the common blue, and therefore this lovely female here is the same, even though her abdomen is colored differently, and she will never have that sort of mushroom ball shape that's easy to identify there. It'll be much darker in all the abdomen segments. Now this is an immature female here, which is not in tandem with a male. I know that it is the common blue for sure, because the location that I was at only had common blues and didn't have the other types of blues that day around, but also because the side of her abdomen does not have the black spur here that would still be showing up even though it's an immature. It's the coloring of the rest that hasn't darkened up yet to her mature coloring. So 4 pictures positioned similarly just to be able to see better. The male and the immature male have the same sort of patterning. It's just the immature hasn't developed the dark blue or the baby blue sort of coloring yet. You can still see these last 2 segments are lighter on the tail to match what it will look like when it's older. And same with the female. It's still dark on top with lighter underneath, same as the mature one will look. Now, another blue damselfly is called the azure damselfly. This is the male here. A nice clear picture with its wings spread a bit apart, which gives us a perfect view of this abdominal segment that we have to look at. So if you remember, the common blue one had the circle or mushroom shape here connected to the line, whereas the azure is not connected to the line, has this more a U shape, or you could also say a sort of squat sort of H shape here. And that identifies it as the azure. If you're really into the details, the shape of the pronotum can be analyzed as well to be able to say which species is which for sure, but that requires a very good clear photograph or a view of it. And again, the female is best left to identify in tandem with the male. So this one is ovipositing here. The male has clasped onto her while she's ovipositing, so if she goes under the water, he can pull her back out again. It's also a bit of a claiming right that he makes sure that no other male can mate with her before she lays his eggs, so he'll hang on to her for that reason as well. But you can see the sort of U or squat sort of H shape that's not connected to the line here in his abdominal segment. And you have this black spur we were talking about sticking out here. So here's the little black bit, and here's the main black spur that is different than the common blue damselfly. And on her, you can see the spur as well here. So if that's not complicated enough, we get into the variable damselfly, which is so named because it comes in variable forms, which isn't very handy. Most identification books will use words like usually it has this feature or often has this feature, and it's never a certain thing because it is the variable. So quite awkward to identify. I'm pretty certain that this one is the variable damselfly because it has all the indications that it could be. Instead of this U shape that the azure would have that is not connected to this line, it is connected to this line by a little bit of black there. And that's a good sign that it could be the variable. As well as the antihumeral stripes are separated into this sort of exclamation mark shape where the black has come in between and separated the stripe into 2 bits. And that's quite common in the variables, though not absolutely 100% certain. You would have to again look at the exact shape of the pronotum here, in which this photograph is not good enough to show that for certain, so I'm just taking a good stab at it that I'm pretty sure I've got this right as the variable. And the female, again, like the other females, doesn't show the same abdominal segment here with the right form, so you can't tell that. There is some identification tricks that use the shape of this shape down here that will lead to being able to say that it's likely the variable, but it's not going to be certain unless you analyze the pronotum shape. Here's the two side by side, the male and the female. So very similar to the other blues. So if there's a blue damselfly flying along, unless it sits down and you get a good view of it, you're not going to be able to confidently say which one it is. The last blue that we have is the blue-tailed damselfly, which some people might argue isn't as difficult as the other ones. It has mostly dark on the top of its abdomen all the way along, except for this blue segment closer to the tail, hence the name the blue-tailed damselfly. I would still put it in the difficult category because if we remember back to this one has the blue splotch at the end of the tail, and the common blue has a good blue splotch at the end of the tail. So if you're seeing them flying, you might not have a good view that this is not all dark as well, because it might just look dark while it's flying, and you might spot the blue tip towards the tail and think, ah, it's the blue-tailed damselfly. But it's easy to make that mistake. The blue-tailed one only has one segment at the end that is a blue, and the rest has to be fully dark to be able to say that it's the blue-tailed. So unless it sits down, you're not going to be able to say for certain what it is unless you've got your eye in practicing to be able to spot the differences in flight, which is a bit tricky. One dead giveaway for the species is the pterostigma we were talking about was important for some species. And the pterostigma of the blue-tailed has this funny faded coloring in it, where one tip of it is white and the other part is black, and it's not fully black like the other pterostigmas of the blue damselflies. So if you can see that funny sort of fading coloring in the pterostigma, then you are going to be certain it's the blue-tailed. Now, the other trick that the blue-tail has up its scheme is that the female comes in quite a few different color forms. So the female can look exactly like the male with the same blue coloring, the same markings. So unless you get a side view here showing the secondary genitalia, you can't be sure that it is a male or female from the top very easily. This is an immature female form of the blue-tailed damselfly, where it still has the blue tip on the tail, but the thorax is this lovely sort of violet color. And that one is one that's going to dark up with age and be one of the mature forms. This is just the immature form of it. Here is another color scheme that you can have for the blue-tailed, where it has a pink tail at the end instead of the regular blue tail, and the thorax is this purpley pink tone as well. Another color form of the blue-tailed can have this sort of brownish pink tail, and the thorax can be this yellowish green color. So it's still blue-tailed damselfly, just one of the many female color forms. And the last color form of the female blue-tailed damselfly has this sort of brownish tip and this sort of orangey brown thorax, which is unique in that it doesn't show its antihumeral stripes anymore. The black that separates between the stripe that should be here and the rest of the thorax, the black has disappeared on the color scheme of this female. So it just looks like it has one black stripe at the very top of the thorax. Which is an interesting form because most of the other color forms just change the base color, it doesn't change the markings on it. So here's the line to compare all together. The female can come in the same blue coloring on the left here, the immature, and the other three female color forms. So all of them will have this one spot on their abdomen that is a different color from the rest. In some of them blue, and in some of them pinkish, purplish, brownish, but they are all the blue-tailed damselfly. The less common scarce blue damselfly is another one to consider in some areas. It's not very common in West Cork, but it has been seen on a few occasions. It is something worth considering once you get more experience, just in case you bypassed it. It looks almost identical, except for the blue splotch on the end of the abdomen is one abdomen segment lower, so it is almost at the tip of the tail instead of in the what they call the 8th segment there. It would be in the 9th segment there, counting from the wings. So we have completed the damselfly identification, this left side of the chart. We've seen our 2 easy ones to identify, the large red and the emerald, and seen how the blues are a bit trickier, and the demoiselles are pretty handy once you get familiar with them. Now we'll move on to the dragonflies. So we've got 3 easy dragonflies that we should keep an eye on if we are beginners. First one is the 4-spotted chaser. So if you see a dragonfly with a rather stout, wide abdomen with yellow stripes on the side, it is going to be your 4-spotted chaser. So let's see that one here. And as a relief from all the complicated blues, the male and female of the 4-spotted chaser look identical. So that is a nice, easy one. If you see it with this color scheme, you've got no doubt it's a 4-spotted chaser, and you don't have to worry any further because the male and female's the same and will never look like any other one. It's called the 4-spotted chaser because it has this extra black spot on its wing, which gives 4 black dots on each side of it, which are easy to see in flight at times once you get your eye in. So it looks like 4 darker splotches, the pterostigma being black, and then this other black splotch halfway between the thorax and the wingtip. Now it is easy to mix that up. If you see a shadow of some vegetation across the wing of something else, you might see a darker bit coming up there. So I like to rely on the abdomen colorings just to make sure that you've got the identification correct. Next one we'll look at is the common darter dragonfly. The common darter is in the medium identification category for what I call it, because it is only needing to be distinguished from the ruddy darter dragonfly, which I do not have a picture of because I've never actually spotted one yet. They should be around West Cork. I just haven't been able to get a picture of one yet. Everything that I check is still the common darter. So I'm not sure if that's just bad luck on my side or if they're not as common in West Cork. The ruddy darter will have a much darker red tone for the abdomen. This one's a bit more orangey. And the ruddy darter will have more of a club-shaped tail even in the males. It'll be wider at the tail for a few abdomen segments. But the dead giveaway, if you're really wanting to get into the nitty-gritty, is to zoom in and see that the side of the leg here has a yellow stripe in it. You can see it there as well. And a little bit there, and that is the distinguishing feature because the ruddy darter will have all black legs. Now if you have the shadow coming the wrong way, the sun coming the wrong way, you can look like it has all black legs too, so it can be a little bit tricky for that side of things. The females of the darters all look yellow and black, so they don't follow the same color scheme as the males. But once you get your eye in, you can tell the difference between them if you know the tricks. The abdomen here at the very tip has 2 parts sticking out of it. For the females, those are spread apart, whereas the males here are held together and are much longer. So that is how you tell the difference between the males and the females. But as for this one being a common darter, you have to have a side view here because it'll have this yellow side of the thorax, the yellow bottom of the thorax, but in between is this black bit with yellow shapes in the middle. The ruddy darter will have a shape that's shaped like a boot with a toe on it here, whereas the common darter will just be these 2 large squarish sort of shape yellow bits. And the black darter that we'll visit in a minute is going to have 3 little yellow balls in the middle of this black shape. So very easy to distinguish once you know what to look for, but you have to get the right view of it to be able to say for sure. Again, you can sort of see the stripe on the leg here, even though it's not a perfect photograph because it was from a distance. But here, what is this one? This one's a common darter dragonfly, but it is an immature male. Again, the immature male sort of imitates the color scheme of the female so that they're not involved in any territorial disputes. But you can tell by the claspers here at the bottom, the claspers are long and held together, and that means the male, instead of the female, having two bits held farther apart there. You can also tell by the wings that this one's very fresh because the wings veins haven't darkened up properly. And the pterostigma is just perfectly clear here because it hasn't matured fully. Even the antihumeral stripes here are just very vague stripes that you can't see the proper coloring on yet. So the three in a row then in similar positions, so you can see the male will eventually darken up to become this redder tone. The female can get a little bit of a reddish tone as she gets older, but she'll always have a bit more of this lighter tone. And if you look at the side of the abdomen, you can tell the difference much more easily. Now the black darter dragonflies. The black darter is, if we just hop back to the chart for a minute, we've covered the four-spotted chaser is pretty easy. The red is medium because it has two different darters to tell the difference between. If you see a dragonfly that is almost all black, it's going to be your black darter. So that's another easy one to distinguish between. So here it is here. They're much smaller dragonflies, so it's one that you need to tell by how the wing positioning is here in this sort of T or cross shape held perpendicular. So that you don't accidentally confuse it with a damselfly, because it is one of the smaller dragonflies. It is an interesting one that it can actually fly in very cloudy conditions. Most dragonflies don't fly unless there's less than 50% cloud cover. And even in a very light drizzle, they seem to get away with being able to fly. There's some research into the idea that the black on the dragonflies can help it heat up and gain more body temperature more easily, so that in more northern areas, the more common dragonflies tend to be the darker colored ones because they can make use of the extra heat that they can gain from the black coloring, whereas dragonflies in more warmer areas tend to have less of these darker colors. So the black darter is common in West Cork, and you get your eye in to spot them. Here is the female. Similar to the other darter, the female is yellow and black, but if you get a good view of it from the side like this, you can see these three small yellow shapes in the black stripe, and that shows that it is the black darter and not a common darter or a ruddy darter. Now this one is, again, not for a beginner, because it's easy to think that that might be the female, but it is the male. The claspers are long and held together, and it has much more of a sort of blurry color form because it's going to slowly darken up over time, over the next days, and become the fully black male form. So if we see in the three forms together, you can see how this one is eventually going to match the color scheme of this one. You can already see some of these spots that will stay yellow are much more strongly lined on the edge, whereas the fuzzier bits are because they're still darkening up. Whereas the female is going to stay lighter all the time. And this one is actually a very good view of the female, the claspers being held apart. Very small little bits on the end of the abdomen with a wide space in between them compared to the males. Back to the chart again, we've done four-spotted chaser, the red ones which are the darters, the black one which is the black darter. Then we're going to move on to the large and spotty dragonflies, which is a bit more complicated because we've got three other questions we need to ask ourselves. First, does it have brown tinted wings? If it does, it's the brown hawker. I don't have a picture of this one. I've never seen one. They don't seem to be as common in West Cork, but they're very common in the Midlands. it could be that it's easy to identify, but because I haven't seen one myself, I thought I'd put it down here in the medium category because I'm not sure if it's easy to mistaken the brown tint of the wings if it's flying around and just mistakenly think that it's a shadow on it or something. But if it is large and spotty and it has clear wings, we've got an emperor, which is easy to identify because of the green thorax. But we're going to skip over for a minute and deal with the harder ones for a minute, which are clear wings, not the brown wings, but not a green thorax, because then we're stuck on 3 different hawker dragonflies, all very large, all with spotty abdomens, but with different positioning of the shapes of the spots and forms. So we've got the common hawker, the migrant hawker, and the hairy hawker. And this is the common hawker dragonfly. So a very large dragonfly, you're never going to mistaken it for a damselfly. Wings held in the T position, quite a large one, and it is has all these different spots and shapes down the abdomen. It is like on the blue damselflies, important to look at this abdomen segment here up close to the wings, because the shapes and positioning of the different shapes on that indicate which species it is. This is the common hawker dragonfly female. So the female can come in a form that it has blue spots like this one on the abdomen, but the more common form is that it has yellow spots on it. But the positioning of these sorts of shapes here is the same as the positioning of these here, except for that this blue is turned to yellow for the female. And the females tend to be a bit more secretive. It's harder to get a picture of them and the males because they can go most of the day without having to sit down until it gets too cool, and then they like to roost higher up in trees where it's hard to get any photograph of them. So the 2 side by side here, the male and the female of the common hawker. Now the hairy hawker, I have yet to get a photograph of the male hairy hawker because, as I just said, they don't sit down very often. But this one I was lucky enough to see is the female of the hairy hawker. So from this positioning, we can't see the abdomen segment as clearly here. But what was a dead giveaway was the side of the abdomen, side of the thorax, sorry, here, which the common hawker has only 2 yellow stripes, and the hairy hawker has 3 yellow stripes that you can just barely see in that picture there. Now it's called the hairy hawker because it is much hairier than the others. But if we go back to these guys here and zoom in, you might think, oh, it's a hairy hawker because it has hair. And that confused me for a while as a beginner because it is not the hairy hawker. The hairy hawker is much hairier all the way down. It's not one that you can go straight by identifying as the hairy hawker just because you see hair. It's easy to mistaken between the common hawker and the hairy hawker, and the migrant hawker and the common hawker, but the hairy hawker and the migrant hawker are not easy to mistake in between because they come out at different times of the year. The hairy hawker is an early season species and is rarely seen after the first week of July, whereas the migrant hawker is the exact opposite. You will rarely see it before the beginning of July. So that is easy to separate those 2, but not easy to separate them each from the common hawker, which is seen throughout the entire season. So that is the hawkers. Now we're going to jump to the last big sort of spotty abdomened large dragonfly, which is the emperor dragonfly, which is in the easy category because as long as you see that it's got this apple green thorax and apple green eyes, it's going to be your emperor, and it is the biggest dragonfly that we have in Ireland. It is a relatively new addition to the Irish species because it came over from the UK in the year 2000. It has been increasingly seen ever since and was able to be mapped slowly migrating across the country until it has been able to be seen all the way over here in West Cork, and it is very few spots that it can't be seen in Ireland anymore. It is a big sort of a bully emperor dragonfly which tries to patrol the territories that it's picked over lakes and rivers, and you'll see it flying back and forth, patrolling the same sort of zone that it claims, and fighting off any dragonflies that come close. So when one's around, you'll see that a lot of the other dragonflies tend to be in taking shelter more in the vegetation and hiding out a bit more, so as to not to get into this bully's way. Because this one is big enough to eat some of the smaller dragonflies and damselflies, so they have to watch out for it. But for photography-wise, it's an interesting one because it tends to do the same sort of jaunts back and forth along the same lines. So if you position yourself in position watching it, you can capture a photograph like this in mid-flight because it's going to be coming in very similar routes each time it circles. This is the emperor dragonfly female. So like the hawkers, the male tends to have the blue coloring, the female tends to have a yellowy green coloring, though it can have the blue coloring as well. So just because this one's blue doesn't mean for sure that it was the male. People have seen blue ones ovipositing, which is a dead giveaway that they're a female, but this one has the more typical female coloring here, ovipositing into the lake off of the pondweed. And the two side by side to compare, so both of them have the green thorax and greenish eyes, and that's the dead giveaway that it's an emperor. Now, the last species that we have to cover, if I haven't confused everybody thoroughly by now, is the keeled skimmer dragonfly. This is the male, a really beautiful one with this blue coloring, even a dark blue thorax, blue sort of steel blue eyes, and the blue abdomen. It's just a really gorgeous one. It's known more in upland areas, so it is quite common in the hills of West Cork and up in the mountain areas where you wouldn't see them as much in some of the lowland areas in other parts of the country. This is what the female looks like, a really lovely tone to its abdomen, I find. The claspers at the end you can see are far apart, indicating it's female. But it still has these sort of steel blue eyes like the male has. And a confusing one, which is easy to think that it is a female, but if we look at the claspers, they are long and held together, and that means that one is a male that just hasn't finished coloring up properly yet. You can also see the wings are very, very new looking with a shine on them. They are very, very bright, and they will soon turn into this fully dark wing veins with the darker pterostigma, and everything else is going to slowly darken up over time to become this blue coloring of the males, rather than the female that has these very distinct lines in them with very clear edges. So, the only dragonflies that I've skipped in that I haven't talked about at all are the two emerald dragonflies, the downy emerald and the northern emerald, because unless you're in the specific areas where they're known to be, in Killarney and one or two lakes around Glengariff, they're not known anywhere else, so you don't have to confuse yourself with knowing what they look like at all unless you're in those areas looking for them specifically. So now I'll talk about the threats. These are just some nice visuals of what are obvious threats to the damselflies and dragonflies. But the biggest threat, of course, is polluted water bodies and any problems with the water bodies because they live most of their life as the larvae. They need clean water sources with lots of insects in them to eat. And that is their biggest threat. These ones are just nice visuals to show that in the bogs they can become prey to carnivorous plants like the sundew. This one here, I will zoom in on, is being attacked by an ant. It was a teneral form, so it probably hadn't had its wings hardened up enough to fly before the ant came and got it, so it was unable to get away from the ant because it just wasn't mature enough to be able to get out of that position. And of course, this spider's got two lovely lunches here because the damselflies can easily get blown into a spider's web on a windy day because they don't have as controlled, forceful flight. So that's a big risk for them. They can, of course, also be eaten by birds plenty and have problems simply because of the weather. If they hatch out, well, not hatch out, but if they turn into their adult form on a nice day and then we get a week of very bad weather, they might not be able to get enough time in to eat and hunt. So that might be a problem that causes their lifespan to be cut quite short. So what can we do to help dragonflies and damselflies? Well, I would say contribute towards citizen science. So the Biodiversity Data Centre is based in Wexford, but provides this online service for anybody anywhere on the island of Ireland to submit records of things that they see. So it doesn't have to be just dragonflies. I love submitting dragonfly records. I've actually become confident enough with my dragonfly identification that I've joined some of their survey schemes. So I survey some wetlands each year throughout the summer at different times to observe all the dragonflies and give account as to how many and what the quality of the water is and what I've seen in different times of the summer at these different water bodies. But anybody can submit casual records of a species as long as they have a photograph and a location and can make at least a semi-confident stab at an identification. They're all validated separately by experts in the background before they get submitted as official records, so don't worry if you're not perfectly certain of your identification. It's still worth trying to make a good stab at it. So this is what the home page looks like of the National Biodiversity Data Centre. It might look a little bit different on your phone. I do everything on the desktop computer, so you would come here and click on Submit Data, and then you'll get a page up that looks like this, which gives you all different interesting sort of anecdotes of what people have recorded, what species they've recorded recently, what's the most common type of bird to be recorded, plants, butterflies, dragonflies, bees, how different counties you could pretend are competing with each other for how many records have been submitted, comparing this year upon last year of how many records are submitted, and different recent pictures of things people have submitted, like this dragonfly that I spot here, for a spotted chaser, has been recently recorded somewhere in the island. And once you're on this page, you can go click here to start recording. So you can click go, or you can click start recording up here at the top of the page, and you'll get this screen up, which gives you an idea of all the different types of species that you can record. Anything from amphibians and ants and birds and bumblebees and butterflies, dragonflies, fish and grasshoppers and hoverflies and jellyfish, ladybirds, hedgehogs, lichens, any marine creature, shield bugs, bees, foxes, wasps, plants, spring flowers, spiders, so many different things. So if your interest lies in any of these areas or you want to start practicing your identification, submit records that you're pretty confident with, and it can all help towards getting a baseline of what things are here right now in the island, because we can only see whether things are in decline if we have enough data to show that there has been a decline. So if there's not enough data right now, how will we know in 50 years' time if there's been any dramatic decreases and what we should do about it if we can't even prove there has been any decreases or increases, hopefully. Once you click on your species, like dragonflies section here, you'll get a page up here to submit your record. So you put in your name here so that it can be properly tracked to somebody, and your email, which doesn't become public knowledge. That's just to be able to contact you back if they have any questions about your record. Your record date of when you saw the species, what county you're in. Your location is one that trips people up at times and gets records to be thrown out of the official record. You need to put a townland or village name. You can't say that you saw it in your garden. You can't say you saw it in a hedge or at the side of the road. You need to put actually a townland name in so that they can cross-reference the point on the map that you pick. because once you're in the spatial reference section, you can zoom in on the map, click your exact spot where you saw the thing, and that can be then cross-referenced with the location name to make sure there's nothing funny going on with your map location. One thing to watch out for is if you do it on the app on your phone, it will automatically take the location of your phone. So if you come home and try to record it later, it will record it as being seen in your location at your home. So then you need to not do it through the app, you need to do it through the regular web page to be able to put in your spot on the map yourself. Because that's a way that some records have had to been thrown out because they're not in the right location for what's been seen. Habitat description down here is optional. It will give you a choice of things like whether it's a lake or a river or a bog that you saw it in. It's not necessary if you're not clear, or if you saw it in a field somewhere that's not close to a water body, you don't have to fill in the habitat description. You do have to say the species name down here. You need to attach the picture that you've got to prove that you've got the identification correct. You can put the life stage as just whether you saw it as a larva or exuvia or an adult stage, so that's more likely to be the adult stage that you've seen it in. If you've been able to determine the sex, you can put that in, but that's optional. And the abundance, again, is optional, but it's usually has a drop-down menu for choices like you just saw a single one, or you saw around 10 or 100, something like that. And then you click on Save Record, and it will go through the validation process and go into the official records to be able to be used by scientists in the future. Now, my last slide is books and websites. So things that I've found useful over the years of learning about dragonflies. The National Biodiversity Data Center has a lovely page up here with an online video showing how to identify between certain species that you can revisit at any time. So that's very handy. The National Biodiversity Data Center also has an online shop which they sell these what they call swatches, which are sort of laminated pages of these little flip books, which will give a picture and the important information to identify different species on there for the males and females of the standard forms. I would highly recommend them. They're only €5 each. And they come in other species as well. They have one on marine species, they have stuff on seashells, they have things on ladybugs, butterflies, mammals. They're just amazing because they're well done and they won't break the bank. So I'd highly recommend those ones. This book is one that I've had for many years now, which if you're a beginner, I would recommend. If you're not at the beginner stage anymore, it would be arguably not the best one for dragonflies because it doesn't give the pictures of the females, and most of them are just with drawings and written descriptions. But there are a good, very basic starting point because it is only the insects of Ireland, which is very important because a lot of identification books are Ireland and the UK together, and the UK has so many more species than we do that it unnecessarily complicates your attempt at identifying things by adding in those other species. And this book is only about €16 online, and it covers species of dragonflies, butterflies, ladybugs, bumblebees, shield bugs, and I believe also grasshoppers and earwigs. So it gives you a broader overview of the beginning position of all of those. Now, 3 online resources that I find handy. Dragonfly Ireland has a little online key. It's based from Northern Ireland species, so includes the UK species, so it's unnecessarily larger than needed for just the ones that we see in West Cork. Same with the British dragonflies, has great information, but will also include the other UK species. And the last website that I really enjoy is the nata.org.uk, written by a dragonfly enthusiast, because once you're past the beginner stage, they get these complicated charts in here to really get into the nitty-gritty detail of exactly the different forms to compare for awkward things like the female blues and things like that. So I would recommend all of those if you're wanting more information. And I would encourage everybody to just get out there and start taking pictures, taking a look at things, even just observing the behavior of dragonflies is great fun to watch. If you see one sitting down having some lunch, they use their front arms to wipe their eyeballs down and clean off their vision. And they're just amazing creatures. So thank you for listening. And I think we can go on to some questions if we have any questions.
Thank you so much for that, Julia. That was just so incredible. Your photographs are amazing, and they really bring these magical creatures to life. Just a note that we did record Julia's webinar and presentation today, so this will go up online, and folks can access that through our YouTube channel, and then also through our website, which I just put the contact details up here on the screen for everyone. Julia, there was just a couple of questions about the emperor. One was on whether or not it lived in suburban habitats or urban habitats, and another was, is it considered an invasive species here in Ireland? Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, very, very good questions. Dragonflies in general aren't as easy to see in busy towns, though I did see one flying down the road in Bantry the other day, which I don't think any other passerby noticed because it was up at the roof line, so not within easy sight of people. But the best way to encourage and help dragonflies is actually to build a little backyard pond. And it's very well known that even a 1-year-old pond can start having breeding dragonflies in it. So the emperor, yes, it's not one that's restricted to highlands like the keeled skimmer would be less likely to see in urban areas. But the emperor is just about anywhere. There's yet to be a lake that I haven't seen it at. It seems to like the larger water bodies rather than rivers, but probably it would go into suburban areas as well. Whether it's called an invasive species is maybe a contentious issue because it hasn't been considered an invasive species because it's native in the UK and hasn't seemed to be out of whack there for many, many, many years. And there's been other things over time, like there's certain butterflies that have transferred over from England. Once a few of them get across, then they can set up shop here because it's similar habitats and conditions. So the emperor is like that, where it came over here and was able to start breeding. And although it's taken about 20 years for it to conquer the whole island in a sense that you can see it everywhere, it hasn't been considered invasive because it doesn't seem to cause any decline in the other dragonflies. Personally, from my experience, I do call it a bully sort of dragonfly, and I do wonder whether it does have an impact on the ability for some of the other ones to breed and feed successfully as much. But there isn't enough data, I think, to be able to prove that, unfortunately. So right now it's considered not an invasive and just one that has come over and expanded its range from the UK. In the back of my mind, I think possibly the UK has more predator birds that might be able to keep it in check that we are lacking. So again, if your ecosystem's not fully healthy, you might end up with a species that's able to be considered more invasive than it otherwise would, but that's yet to be able to be determined fully.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Julia. And we'll open it up now to the rest of the questions. I'll stop the recording here. But thank you to everyone who came and engaged with us today. We're just delighted. And thank you again to the Heritage Council for their support for today's webinar. And do contact us at streamscapes.ie if you have any questions at all. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.